everyone, my name is Plena and welcome back to my literary channel. Today we're talking about volume 1 of The Second Sex. Usually before starting the chapter by chapter summary and analysis, I would give a brief overview of the author's biography, but there's a lot to get through today, so let's just start. Published in 1949, The Second Sex is considered a hugely important work that revived feminism, which had faded a little, and changed the notions of women, as well as laying the foundations for the second wave feminism. French women voted for the first time in 1945. Birth control was not yet legalized. The law allowing for people to sell contraceptives and use contraceptives was passed in 1967. This was the time when Beauvoir published her critically important The Second Sex. The Vatican placed it on its index of forgotten books for its explicit passages on the female body, and probably for its critique of the church's view as well. In the introduction to the text, Beauvoir brings up 3 key ideas that are addressed later. First, she points out that it is unclear exactly what is a woman and what is femininity. When we talk about it, we refer to it in terms that are, quote, vague and shimmering, borrowed from a clairvoyance vocabulary. She makes clear that biological and social sciences no longer believe that your characteristics have an effect on the decisions that you make and the reactions that you have. Just because you're black, you're not going to react a certain way to a situation. You're not biologically predetermined to act in a certain way. So then, if this is the case, does the word woman have no meaning? In particular, Beauvoir is critical about the American idea at the time, and arguably now, that femininity doesn't have a meaning and that women should be treated as human beings. While she agrees with the idea at hand, she believes that nominalism makes it very easy for anti-feminists to compare women to men and to circle all the differences and give all the reasons why women are not as good enough as men. She says that to reject the notions of the eternal feminine is not to deny that there are women. This denial is not a liberation but an inauthentic fact. So then, what is a woman? This brings us to a second point, the difference in defining sex. That a man would never write a book on men's position in society is what Beauvoir is trying to say. Let's remember that the reactionary MRA was not a thing back then. Simone says that a man never identifies himself of his sex, that he is a man is obvious. The relation of the two sexes is like that of unequal magnets, as Simone describes it, where a man takes both the positive and the neutral, and the woman is left to take the negative. What does it mean to take the positive and the neutral here? Positive is that we define man as at the forefront of ideas, as the leader, as the person who doesn't have problems, as the person who doesn't have struggles. This is not to say that men do not have problems, it's just that at Simone's time while she was writing the book, it was considerably less stressed than that of women. And by default, the man also takes the neutral. We assume that someone is the man. He assimilates all terms to be like him. Like the French term homme means, while it means men, it also means man, as in English, man does not only mean men, but man as in all of humanity. That brings us into our third key idea, following on from this, as the man is the main, the woman is the other. She is thought of as the other. Her point is that man has meaning without woman, but a woman has no meaning without man. He is the subject, he is the absolute, she is the other. The category of the other is not based on any empirical evidence. It is not a fact that black people are the other from white people. It is similar as to village people, those outside the village are the other. For anti-Semites, Jewish people are the other. It's a subjective category, and so people eventually realize just how subjective it is through, for example, travel. But then women is not a minority. Women should not be seen as the other because, for example, unlike black people who are the minority in certain countries, which can lead to discrimination, women make up actually the majority of the planet. So then why is it the way it is? And here we get to another point that Beauvoir is saying it's actually kind of women's fault. She says this: if woman discovers herself as the inessential and never turns into the essential, it is because she does not bring about this transformation herself. The problem, according to Beauvoir, is that women do not have a sense of collectiveness. Women cannot make men to be the other. For example, the proletariat believes themselves to be we and the bourgeoisie to be them. It is this mentality of us versus them. And Beauvoir believes that women cannot do this, and it is precisely because of this that they cannot make men as the problem and take steps to evaluate and figure out the solution to their problem. Beauvoir believes that women's victories are only those that men have conceded to them, and there is solidarity in class and nationality but not in sex. Actually, in modern times, I would argue that there is solidarity between sex, so it's definitely interesting to read not only the theory but about the historical difference of the time. A woman has ties to her husband, to her children. It's biological. She gave birth to these children. And so by having these ties, she cannot bring herself to rise up against them, as Beauvoir argues. A woman would not dream of wiping out the entire male sex, as, for example, a crazy, fanatic person of one race might do to another race. Another critical change that we now have the movement of radical feminists who believe that that is the way to proceed, and we also have the incel movement with people taking the black pill and resorting to extreme violence. Is it a general increase in violence and opportunity as well as means of communication, or is it just that things are still as they were before, we just know more about them? But I'm getting off topic. Hard to refuse to be the other, especially when you get awarded privileges to be the other. He argues that men encourage women to be the other because it gives them certain benefits, such as protection. But the path, although hard, gives a liberation that provides a sense of authenticity. This is why women must stop to be the other. And so she begins to speculate on what exactly made society the way it is today. And she references Simone de Beauvoir, who said that everything that men have written about women should be viewed with suspicion because they are both judge and party. However, saying that men cannot understand fully is not the same as saying that men should not be included in the conversation. They absolutely should. Yet another message that I feel gets twisted over time, which is why it's important to return to the original source. Hope that introduction helped, and so we move on to chapter 1, the chapter about biology. The very same biology that people cite when they try to explain their sexism, that even in the process of making a child, women are always passive. It is always the male who dominates them. This exact point, as Beauvoir points out, the process of making and fertilizing an embryo is an active process. The ovum anticipates and nourishes the life that the male gamete provides. However, it cannot by itself incite the change. The male is the trigger here. The two depend on each other. It is not a process that can be made individually of each other in the case of humans. However, she also points out that in nature there is actually a lot of asexual reproduction. Beauvoir disputes the ideas put forward by Plato and Hegel of these sex divisions being a natural state of beings. She points out that these theories and speculations of why men and women are different cannot be justified by simply looking at cells. One cannot look at cells and from this gather an explanation of why humans are the way they are. The cells that make us up, they make us up, but they do not define us. She cautions us as well against viewing everything as a battle of the sexes, I think a key distinction for people to remember. And this example about both sexes working together rather than one being superior over another is a critical one. She also brings up, in a very novel example for the time, the changes that women experience during puberty. During puberty, she says that women are weakened, unlike men who are strengthened, whose voice becomes deeper, who acquire the characteristics that are required from society. She also points out that for older women, it is actually, they sometimes lose the role of women simply because they cannot make children anymore. But while she believes that these changes are important to womanhood, she once again points out that these changes do not define who women are. But her body is not enough to define her. It has a lived reality, only as taken on by consciousness through actions and within a society. Biology alone cannot provide an answer to the question that concerns us. Why is woman the other? The question is how, in her, nature has been taken on in the course of history. The question is what humanity has made of the human female. In chapter 2, we explore the psychoanalytic point of view, what key theorists at the time, for example Freud and Adler, believed. Freud that all behavior is driven by desire and seeking pleasure, while Adler believes that we aim to achieve certain goals, and he replaces sexual drive with motives. To him, sexuality is secondary to intelligence. Freud argues that a woman is a sort of damaged man who is destined to forever be upset over the fact that she does not have the same sexual reproductive organs as the man. Yes, Freud, that's definitely the cause of all my problems. Beauvoir criticizes psychoanalysts for not believing that there is a choice and for just simply believing that our biological characteristics are the sole thing that drives us forward. She references Sartre's work, Being and Nothingness, to explain that sexuality is only one part of the quest for meaning and for figuring out your identity. Beauvoir uses an allegory of colors to explain why the idea of female desire being passive is weird. For example, you cannot think of both yellow and green at the same time. You have to have the idea of blue in your head. She suggests that instead of vague terms like energy, when talking about desire, we need to couple it with other characteristics such as eating, walking, just general normal parts of life. Key ideas from here are: 1. Beauvoir doesn't assume sexuality is given, it's rather shaped by societal values enforced on both women and men. 2. She liberates women from their biological desires here. She gives them greater freedom by pointing out that they have a choice, and she rejects the psychoanalytic view that girls are torn between their father's, quote, virloid mannerisms and their mother's femininity. She sees women as being in a struggle in choosing to be the other or to be truly liberated. For us, woman is defined as a human being in search of values within a world of values, a world where it is indispensable to understand the economic and social structure. We will study her from an existentialist point of view, taking into account her total situation. On to Chapter 3, the view of historical materialism. The key idea here is that, quote, women was not created by the bronze tool alone. The machine is not sufficient to abolish her. This is the conclusion that Beauvoir comes to in examining the role of history in shaping the differences between men and women. She considers Engels' idea of progress being shaped by technology, that men went out and hunted and developed machinery, and so they developed the idea of ownership and private property, and thus women became private property. And this is why women lost their value in the eyes of society and became inferior to men. But she says this is very surface level, since it's not actually explained how this changes here, so men is better kind of mentality came about. She merely points out that because men had an advantage, he used it to dominate women, as is the case in biology. If an evolutionary trait is valued more, that becomes the more dominant one. She points out that things like childbirth and sexuality are not actually accounted in the view of historic materialism. Basically, historic materialists base everything in possession and they don't go beyond that. That is her criticism. She also argues that for women's equality, a truly socialist ethic is great because it will grow uncomfortable that women are not equal and seek to liberate it. She defines a truly socialist ethic as one that seeks justice without restraining liberty, one that imposes responsibilities on individuals but without abolishing individual freedom. There is also a criticism of the USSR's gender equality. Beauvoir believes that old patriarchal constraints are being brought back in Soviet Russia and references a speech that was made to motivate women to become flirtatious and to wear makeup in order to advance the falling birth rate and to produce babies. I'm actually not sure what speech this is referencing. So as a summary, we reject Freud's sexual idea and Engels' economic ones because a woman's sexual and economic positions are inadequate to encompass a concrete woman. On to part 2. Part 1 was the heftiest. It gets simpler from here. I'd also like to point out that the chapters differ in length, and so hence the summaries do as well. In chapter 1, we continue with the idea that when one sex has an advantage, it will oppress the other. She considers how it is exactly that men came to gain the historical advantage. Beauvoir does not believe that male production is better than female production, but it is because humanity always longs for more that male values came to be valued and female values became devalued. When humans make their distinctions from animals clear, they find their meaning, and women's role was one of simple biology. For animals as well, it is simple to give birth, while men, they went out and they discovered that they can actually hunt and eat those animals that are out there, and that they can possess it and innovate and invent new things, and that they are hence superior to animals. And this is not to say that women are animals, of course not. It's just that to men, women faded into a secondary role. Even though women contributed to life, she dismisses it as a cycle of repetition. What do I mean here by repetition? Well, that before you simply ate, hunted, enjoyed yourself, and eventually died, either from animals or just from, life. It was your time. While Beauvoir argues that this is exactly why men broke that cycle, and so by breaking out that cycle, they set out the rules, they laid a foundation, and this is why women is at a disadvantage in modern-day society, since they were not the ones who made the rules. In chapter 2, Beauvoir brings up an interesting idea that having a female ruler doesn't necessarily make life better for women. An example is, once again, Russia, Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great, a female queen, she forfeits her sex in a way because she does not become the woman ruler. She becomes merely a ruler. She's not a woman ruler anymore, and so hence she does not focus on female problems. She focuses on her country. In this chapter as well, Beauvoir focuses on how different societies view the woman. In primitive societies, woman is still the other because they view childbirth as this divine thing, and woman is as the divine, so she has the status of being more than humanity. Hence, again, she's different from men. She is the other. While in modern societies, woman is seen as inferior to man, and man as the primary person. So once again, woman is the other. The woman cannot escape her fate. She is always seen as the other. She is always seen in relations to men. From here, Beauvoir argues that society has always been made to cater around men and that women are always secondary. It is men who make women their idols, and so it is men who can then destroy these idols. Men also struggle with figuring out the role of women as companion or as slave, because Beauvoir argues that men want a companion. They want someone to be there to accompany them, as well as all humans do. But she argues that because men cannot decide and at the same time they want women to serve them, this is why the role of women fluctuate. And depending on how much man wants her to be a companion or a slave, it is how her status in society varies. The other is passivity confronting activity, diversity breaking down unity, matter opposing form, disorder resisting order. Woman is thus doomed to evil. In chapter 3, Beauvoir discusses private property and how it is that women came about to be inferior and to be men's property. Also, she discusses how to enter this world as a woman is a grace due to high numbers of female babies being thrown away in favor of male babies, as they're seen as the more valued one, and also the double standards of polygyny. She argues that with the arrival of private property, men began to seek women's fidelity. There's this mentality of what's mine is mine, and if you're a woman, you cannot even look somewhere else because you belong to me and you are my private property. She talks about, once again, the difference in different cultures, how in some cultures, if a woman has been with other men before her marriage partner, she's seen as being devalued. She's seen as this quality of hers is seen as affecting her ability to give children to the man who she married. While in other cultures, it is the opposite. If a woman has not been with other men before, it is considered that there's something wrong with her, so people actively seek to help her and find other partners for her before her final marriage. Or, for example, in Egypt, women maintain higher social status when they are married. Beauvoir argues that only by escaping to the laws of society can women be truly free and not be dependent on men to have their sense of false emancipation. For example, sex work. While sex work does not come with a high status, it comes with its own liberty. It brings up the example of ancient Rome, where women had social standing and they had economic independence, but they had no control over their own bodies and they had no control over political decisions. And hence it was a sense of false emancipation. A bigger cage is still a cage, Beauvoir argues. In chapter 4, we examine Christianity's role in shaping women's position. Beauvoir argues that Christianity sees women's sexuality as demonic, and thus by perpetuating these values, it is kind of condemning women to be seen as inferior. It is Eve who has brought all evil onto the planet. It is Eve who had kicked out Adam and Eve from the garden. It is the female sex who is the devil, and thus man must subjugate it to be hers. This is what Beauvoir argues. She talks about Germanic traditions where women are well valued as long as they are men's property, and she also talks about this tendency to view women as romantically in poetry, but it not being as good as it seems surface level, because it still describes women as being sinful and as being somehow inferior to men. There is a positive note though when Beauvoir argues that some movements, such as the Italian Renaissance in the 18th century, has brought a higher level of freedom to women. For example, because individuality was encouraged during the time, women could sponsor the arts and free thinking was generally encouraged. In the fifth and final chapter of part 2, Beauvoir argues that often movements leave women behind, such as, for example, the French Revolution, and how hard it is to... She also argues how hard it is being a mother and at the same time doing other work. And women's fertility was something that states always wanted to control, and this is why especially it's hard to break out from this balance of being a caregiver and being, well, in our modern terms, a working mother. Actually, through all her criticisms of Soviet Russia, Beauvoir applauds it for the progress that it has made, because it has seen women's rights as not only that of women's rights but also that of class struggle, and she sees that it's important for movements to consider different things when it comes to women's position, such as their economic standing, and this is why in Soviet Russia this was, in her eyes, a progress. She argues that circumstances have prevented women from rising to their full potential, and they need the time, space, and the ability that men grant them to actually have the opportunity to create. I think you can definitely see the influence of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own here. She condemns the anti-feminist perspectives that women cannot create anything great, that they haven't created anything great because they are naturally inferior. Actually, she points out that it is simply because it's much harder for women to do something in society because of their underprivileged position. Marriage is still more difficult for women, and they have to bear both the work at home and the work at work, so I would say that I guess this is the dual burden. However, she says that marriage is the best way to gain social advancements, but it does limit women as the other, and thus she urges all women to actually exert effort and to go out and get a job, because this idea of women marrying, even though they have higher social status, it perpetuates the cycle that women are worse workers, and so she encourages everyone to give up those privileges and for women to go out and work. Even though I found part 2 to be fascinating, I thought it was weaker than part 1, and it was more case studies rather than arguments, as I think can be seen through the summary and analysis bits. I will do a mini review at the end. On to part 3. I won't focus on super in-depth examinations of every author, but in part 3, Beauvoir focuses on some famous writers such as D.H. Lawrence, Montherland, Claude Breton, and Stendhal. She credits Stendhal as actually seeing women as human beings. Apologies, something went wrong with my camera, so I'm just gonna record a quick voiceover here. All of these novelists believe that women are perfect when they are the other, and expect women to be selfless and sacrificial for men. If not, they are portrayed as evil. Beauvoir speculates on how these beliefs affect everyday life, and reiterates that women cannot be encompassed by a single idea. This leads to men trying and failing to understand them, and settling for writing vague, untrue things, posited as universal truth and meaning of women. And the connection of women to nature leads to men seeing the suffering and inferior position as natural. Beauvoir points out that taking away these myths in favor of truth would not reduce men's experience, and celebrates that women who occupy professional positions are now increasingly seen as desirable too, in hopes that perhaps this will pave the way forward to new beliefs. Simone de Beauvoir makes use of stimulating questions that prompt the reader to think, and uses we a lot as a way to make it more personal for the reader. Her tone is quite humorous. It makes it easy to understand her point, but there are quite long sentences which made it difficult for me sometimes to follow in French, so I'm happy I read along in English too. Part 2 is much more assertive and filled with historical examples than other parts, but I would say part 1 addresses the most anti-feminist criticisms. Overall, it's clear how much work was put into this, and I'm honestly in shock that Beauvoir published this so quickly. Her choices of words and case studies are nuanced, and this really shows why this book was so revolutionary. Everything is very smooth flowing, and it's brilliantly written. I got a sense of incompletion a little, but this is perhaps because it's only the first volume. I look forward to reading and filming a video on the second volume, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment, it means a lot both to me and the YouTube algorithm. Wink wink. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.